Great. So, okay, so we started the recording. Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rachel Bernard. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Development in GSAS Compass, and very grateful and glad to have Tsveta, Petrova, and Elena Krumova with us this morning for a great presentation that's part of the MA Academic and Professional Development series on how and why to present at a conference. So I'm just going to turn it over to you for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see people here. This is the second year we're doing this with Tsveta together, and we're very glad to do it again. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, but Tsveta, you go ahead.
Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Tsveta, and I'm happy to be here with you for this presentation. I think it's one of the most exciting things that we do in academia, which is have conversations about issues that are important to us and to the broader world for various reasons. And I think that's the big why of why deliver a conference presentation. It gives you an opportunity to learn from others, but also participate in these conversations that help us improve our understanding on a set of topics, but also move the entire academic conversation forward. And there are many topics, many of the ones that you guys are interested in, where you really can, which can benefit from being continued in various such social forums. So in thinking about how to best prepare to be part of these conversations, what Elena and I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about how to structure your presentation so that you're most effective and efficient in participating in these conversations. And then also how to deliver that presentation both in person and online. Okay, so starting first with the presentation structure. If we think about the point of making a presentation, it is the same point as that we have in writing, which is our goal is ultimately to deliver a point. To be part of a conversation, we have a set of ideas that we want to share. And so in a way, you can think about your presentation as an opportunity to tell a story. It's your story, it's the story of your research and the conclusions that you have reached. But the most important point is that you need to have and to flesh out and to foreground and to state again and again your main argument. What is the point that you want your audience to take from your presentation? You need to start with this point as it's the most central part of any presentation. And then you need to think about the story that will help convey that point, illustrate it, substantiate it, and how to organize around the story around this argument. But we always start with the main argument. If there was one thing your audience should remember after your presentation, whether it's 2 minutes or 15 or an hour, what would that point be? So we start with this main idea, and then we build the story around it. And as you can see on the slide, the story has a story arc of its own. I love to talk to my students about them presenting as if their presentation were a Hitchcock movie. And why do you think I like to do that? I realize it's a somewhat unusual analogy, but what I like and appreciate about Hitchcock's movies is that he's a master of suspense. And the interesting thing is that unlike many other stories, which tend to reveal who is the killer or to solve the mystery at the end of the movie, what Hitchcock does so masterfully is to let you know very early on sort of who is the main suspect. And yet he manages to create throughout the movie this sense of immense suspense and to keep you engaged in the movie. And in a way, you need to do something similar with your presentation. You should have your very central argument at the beginning, but still think about how to create suspense and move the presentation in a very familiar story arc. Moving to the next slide. Again, a point, as we said, it needs to have a good structure. to it, which is the story arc, and it has to have a central point. And here's an example of a very good academic formula for how you might achieve this. And again, this varies discipline to discipline. It's a somewhat simplified, but it's also a very familiar framework or formula for how to organize the presentation. And so it would be well received by your audience because they're used to this format. And it's as simple as you open with a hook. You open with your main research question and your main argument. So again, you want to have that argument very early on at the beginning to make sure that while your audience is still paying attention, they get that central point. And then your story arcs goes around presenting the data that substantiates your argument, that elaborates it, that provides color. And usually it revolves around a couple of main pointings. You might want at the beginning to define your concepts so that you and your audience are on the same page by what you might mean when you use certain controversial concepts and ideas. Usually we want to refer to the literature because, again, to the extent that this is a conversation in academia, we want to build on what has already happened and further it by highlighting what are some of the gaps or the biases in that previous literature. Then you want to tell your audience a little bit about how you thought about this question or problem. What is some of the information that you used to answer your research question, how you analyzed it. And then you move to presenting bits and pieces of your evidence, which is curated very carefully. So it gives the audience a sense of how you've done your research and what are your main points without being overwhelming, without being too in the weeds, and then present it in a way that's accessible to interested non-experts. But throughout this presentation, again, to build the sense of suspense, to make sure your audience understands your main points, you want to tell everyone what you will tell them, give them the material, and then close by reminding them what you have told them. Okay, moving on, there is a couple of additional points that we wanted to highlight. And the first one is that oftentimes having done research and oftentimes really invested a lot of time and effort into our research, we want to give everyone the whole story. We want to show them the complexity. We want to show them the detail. We want to show them all those interesting facts and pieces of information that kept us up at night, that motivated us to keep working. But, you know, as you present, because it's easy to overwhelm your audience, it's important to remember that you really need to keep things simple. So less is more. Make sure you simplify your story so that main point really comes across. But of course, don't necessarily hide. You don't have to keep all of the details off the table. You can prepare additional materials in case those come up in Q&A or in case you have time for those later on. Okay. So with these general points, we thought that we would now give you a little bit more diversity in terms of other formulas and ways of presenting your research relative to other research that already exists to help you efficiently move the academic conversation forward. And with that, I'll turn to Elena.
Great, thank you, Tsveta. And these are some frameworks, as we think of them, that will help you structure the story arc of which Tsveta was talking about. That you need to build suspense, you need to build tension. In every story, there is some kind of climax and resolution of a problem that is presented in the beginning. So these are frameworks that help you kind of think about how to present the problem in a story-like way when you are not really, you know, in a traditional sense telling a story, but you're telling about research. You're talking about maybe data, you're talking about methods, right? So how do you make that more interesting and engaging to your audience? And there's several ways that people usually do that. There may be more, you may be very creative and have another one, but here are several that we have kind of discovered and put there for you. So the first and very kind of the Hitchcockian one is the whodunit, right? There is an unexplained phenomenon A, what might be some explanations? So here I'm going to present several hypotheses to you and find out. So you're going systematically through these hypotheses and saying, let's see what the evidence says about this. So I have a real example from real research here. In this case, this is from Bowling Alone, from a book from a while ago now by Robert Putnam. This is how his book kind of works. There is a decline in participation in civic organizations in America. Why is that? And then he goes systematically. Is it because of increasing participation of women in the labor force? Is it because people move away from their hometowns more frequently than in the past? Is it because people have less leisure time overall? Or is it generational change? It is not valued as an activity anymore. And it kind of keeps you engaged to find out which one of these factors really explains the most and how much does that matter. There's another set of frameworks that I generally call controversy, right? You can build on controversy and you can take a different position. This one is the position of the contrarian. Right? So there is an argument that A is correct, but I'm going to show that A is not correct and propose that B is correct. When you say that in the beginning, then your audience knows what's coming and how to follow and is engaged in whether you'll be able to successfully do that. This example comes from a paper from 2006 by Dodds and Watts. And here's what they say. Success of cultural products is typically analyzed as a result of their intrinsic features. That means we like a painting because we think there's something about the painting itself that we appreciate, and that's why it's successful. But we will show that this approach is wrong. Instead, social influence analyzed through social networks is a better way to understand which cultural products become successful and which do not. So they build an experiment to show that which music people end up liking the most is heavily influenced by which music their friends like. So it's not that it's intrinsic to the music itself. So this is the position of the contrarian. There could be a different position that you take, which is the adjudicator, right? So you say, one camp says A, another camp says B. I don't know, which one is it? I'm going to bring data and I'm going to have great methods to show you that I can adjudicate between these two camps. So here is an example of such a paper. What is a better strategy for economic growth? Economic diversification or economic specialization? Scores of economists have debated this issue, and I'm here to assess the empirical evidence. Right? So you come in and you say, I'm going to resolve this debate because I have great data, great methods. And there's yet a third way to engage in controversy, which is the third way, right? You say one group says A, another group says B, but I'm here to show you that it's neither A or B, it's actually C. So there is the third way. And this again is from a paper from Pedres and Stark, who say researchers have attributed innovative ideas to weak ties outside the group that provide contact with new ideas in the larger environment. They emphasize the importance of diffusion of ideas through brokerage. Other researchers explain innovation by the close ties among a group of people who are closely working together to generate knowledge. In other words, strong ties. They emphasize fostering a safe environment for disagreement, friction, and failure. So some people say it really matters kind of these faraway connections that you have because they bring new ideas. Other people say, well, it's really the close ties that foster innovation, but they're both onto something. But here is the thing. What is really important is that cohesive groups partially overlap with each other and form weak ties. We call this network feature structural points. So they propose reconciling the debate by proposing a third way. So these are the kind of controversy frameworks that you can also engage in agreement. right? So you're not necessarily taking a stance in a controversy or creating a controversy yourself, but you're building an agreement. And you can be, for example, the tester, right? There is a theory proposed by some researchers, and I'm going to bring in more solid evidence in support of this theory, right? So you could say, you know, maybe it was more qualitative, and now you have another case, another qualitative case from a different place, or you have quantitative data and you can support the qualitative one. So here's an example like that. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram conducted a field experiment involving the delivery of a piece of mail to a stranger and developed a theory later called 6 degrees of separation. It points that everyone on the planet is connected to each other by only 6 degrees, in other words, through 6 other people. Is this theory actually true if we really put it to the test? What is the average network path length? So this experiment is interesting because it brought a new idea, but it was hard to confirm conclusively because this was in the 60s. There were computational limitations. Now we can conduct an internet experiment and collect 60,000 message chains originating in 163 countries in search of 18 targets around the world. Will the theory still hold true? Lo and behold, it did. 6 degrees of separation turned out to be true in this paper by King, Jennings, and Fletcher. Oh, I'm sorry. It's still Duncan Watts. Okay. And then finally, there's also another framework for agreement, which is the gap filler. This is probably what you have mostly heard about. And here's an example. We know some determinants of outcome A, but they don't give the full picture. I'm going to suggest that something else is also important. So here's an example of this. Medical interventions for behavior in childhood have increased over the past 2 decades. Some socioeconomic factors that explain this rise are parental socioeconomic status, shifts in medical practices, accessibility of drugs. However, all of these factors do not explain all the effects. What else is going on? So these are important, but it's not the full picture. And one factor that has been overlooked is the role of schooling on stimulant use. We show the school-based use is more prevalent among students of higher SEC in states with strict policies. So they looked at weekends and summer versus school time and kind of made that into a natural experiment. You can look up all of these papers and books that I'm referencing. That there's links to the publications, and you can refer to them and see how they are able to build this tension and kind of tell you what the story arc will be so that you can follow it. And I think we covered that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the frameworks that Elena gave you, I really like them. And I somewhat am envious that she has come up with this typology, because I think it's really useful, even at the stages of your research, when you are trying to understand what others have written on your topic, and then you're creating this map of what the literature says and how you position your own research within that. So take advantage of those frameworks and use them both as you write, as you research, and especially as you present. They give you a fantastic story arc. We also wanted to talk not just about the body of the presentation, but to give you a sense of what makes a good beginning and an end. And of course, many of you have heard the fact that most people can really pay attention to any particular topic for no more than 5-6 minutes. And that most audiences are most alert and engaged at the beginning of a conversation and at the end of the conversation. So in a way, the opening of your presentation and the conclusion of your presentation is really, really important, because this is the time when you have the audience's attention. Okay, so then the question is, how do you use this valuable time most effectively? We wanted to give you just a few ideas. Again, recognizing that for many of you, this will be a question of individual style. It will also be a question of experimenting with different strategies and seeing what works for you. And finally, it's also a question of what the research is about and what that leads you. would make a good conclusion or a presentation. But in thinking about the beginning, especially, usually you want something that we traditionally refer to as a hook, which literally hooks your audience to your question. It engages them, it gets them thinking, it provokes them in a certain way. And the simple opener and the most straightforward and the classic opener is by previewing your main point. You can just start by saying, today I will argue whatever your argument is. And that never gets old, and it's most efficient. And you know that at this point, you have at least conveyed your main point. But if you could also experiment with sort of beginning and painting some of the implications of the research question that you might be answering. Let's say you are thinking about the news today and you're wondering about the sanctions that are imposed on Ukraine, and would those work? You can, if that were your research question, you can begin by explaining what's at stake about whether those sanctions would work or not. Another way to begin your presentation is to possibly present the puzzle. You remember, since young kids, we are preoccupied with puzzles. We find them interesting, we find them compelling, we want to solve them. And so to the extent that there's something unintuitive or interesting or surprising about your research, start with that. It will get your audience hooked. Of course, there's also the personal angle. And many movies, create their suspense by making a particular episode personal to the protagonist. And you can do the same. You can start with an anecdote or a personal story. It could be a story about how you got involved in that research. It could be a story about how your own personal experience relate to the research. It could be just an anecdote about the protagonist in your story. But whatever it is, again, we as humans, we respond to stories. We engage with them, they capture our imagination. So use that to your advantage. And then there is kind of a third set of openers and closers are techniques of engaging audience. And those would include asking a question. How many of you have noticed the rising price of gas today? Again, if we're sticking with the Ukraine story, and you can tell what preoccupies me this morning, so I apologize for that. But you can ask a question that's relevant to your research, and again, gets your audience to think about the topic. We like questions, we like their opinion to be considered, and most audiences will think about the question and follow you through the presentation. You can also use humor, tasteful jokes that are relevant to your presentation are always a good way to start that presentation. You can also use facts, shocking facts. And here on the slide, you have one of the facts that I saw in a presentation that still stays with me to today, which is why it's included in this presentation. And it was the simple fact that in South Africa, one woman is murdered every 3 hours. If you stop and think about that, it's mind-boggling. And because of that, I still remember this specific presentation, even though it wasn't even on a topic that I tend to work with. So if there's something striking, memorable about your topic, start with that. It will stay with the audience, just like this specific example has stayed with me. So these are good ways to start the presentation. They're also good ways to end the presentation. So do not hesitate by being creative in the beginning and at the end, especially if you stick to the more traditional models of the story arc in the middle of your presentation. Okay, next. Okay, so now we've given you some ideas about how to structure the presentation in its various parts. And now we thought we would give you some of our advice on what we have found useful in terms of presenting the slides. Most disciplines these days still rely on having some visual materials. And that's increasingly so given the digitization of much of work today. And so we wanted to highlight for you what is important what we found useful, what research says is good in terms of tradecraft of slide presentation. And the first point, and it's a simple point, and you've heard us make it about the presentation in general, but it holds for the materials. That point is that less is more. We've all been to presentations where there's so much text that you as the audience are torn between, should I be reading this text? Should I be listening to the presenter? Where should my attention be? This clearly the text was important if it's there, but it's so small and I'm trying to figure out, and it's getting, there's details and it seems like the presenter is talking about something else. You do not want to divide your audience attention. You want your slides to be minimal, as minimal as possible, with just enough to give an overview of the segment that the slide covers, but maybe bullet points, maybe not even individual sentences. Just keep it simple. The slide should be a reference that anchors the presentation, the oral presentation, rather than the substitute for the oral presentation, rather than an elaboration for the presentation. So this is the golden rule: less is more. Next, it is really important to use your slides, because they're a different medium, to use the slides to do the right kind of visualization. And again, there is an element of less is more, right? You don't want too complicated graphs, which are usually referred to as spaghetti graphs, right? Because there's so much going on that it's really hard to disentangle what's the main point. But you also want to make sure that even if it's not just a question of too much information that's being presented, that the main visual point is clear and it's easy for the audience to see just by a quick look at the slides, right? So the slides are a different medium. They allow you to, if using text, to anchor your main points, to give your audience an outline of those points, but they also allow you to tell the story visually. So to the extent that you're telling the story visually, be sure that there isn't too much information, the point is clear, and that you have in the visual presentation found a way to mark, to highlight, to flag what the key takeaway is, right? So for example, look at those, the two slides that are very similar, but look how much more powerful the slide on the left is. And it's for the simple fact that it very clearly points your attention to what you should be paying attention to. Okay, and then finally, there's an interesting style, and you might have seen it in various TED Talks, which is very, very powerful, which works with another way in which our brain processes information. Just like we love a good story, so we love a good picture. And sometimes one picture could be enough and could carry your point for you, could illustrate that point, can add more detail and color. And in that case, if you find a powerful image, just stay with it. Just keep the pure image and maybe have a simple caption or a title. Don't do too much. Let the picture tell that story. So to sum up, in terms of slides, I think there's two key points that we've tried to make for you. The first point is that less is more. And the second one is that you need clarity and you need to signal to your audience what the key takeaway is. Okay. Now, in the last segment of our session today, we thought we would talk about a little bit about what are some good strategies for in-person presentation and for digital presentations. And I will start now with the in-person presentation part. And I would have to recognize that conveying some of that is difficult online. But again, please imagine that we were all sitting in a classroom together and you could see actually my body language and I could talk you through what might work or not, or what research has found works or not. But presentations, especially in person, there's a very important body language element to those presentations. And of course, you've all seen speakers who will walk in the room and they own the audience immediately before they have said a word, before they started the presentation. And that is about body language, because we as human beings, we judge the body language, we have a perception, we form ideas within split seconds. And so again, because of that, you need to be very mindful of your own language, body language, and you need to practice it. It's really hard, even for experienced scholars. Body language can betray them or can undermine their point. And this is especially the case for young scholars like you. And so here, the main advice is just to practice, focus on one thing at a time till you make progress in that and move to the other ones. But here are some of the things that we tend to focus. First, energy. Imagine the difference between you, right before you get on stage, reminding yourself why you got into this research question, what keeps you excited about it, why you're so interested in it. So if you could get to that place that keeps you engaged in that research, and you manage to convey, to have that, to bring that energy to your presentation, I'm convinced that that presentation will be a success. Because again, we as humans, we tend to mirror each other's emotions. And if you feel the energy and excitement about your research, chances are that that will convey to the audience. And of course, we've all seen these presentations where the speaker is sitting in front of you, reading something monotonously, and no matter how interested you are in the topic, you just zone out. So again, think about the energy you bring to the presentation. It is really, really powerful. Okay. Second, gestures. Okay, let me actually try and adjust my screen. While with slides and stories, less is more, with gestures, big gestures are more. Again, confidence and energy in humans tend to be portrayed with being assertive in your space, taking on more space with your body, being upright, feeling confident, but also with your gestures, right? It's really weird if someone sort of has small gestures. It feels unnatural to humans. It might feel like that if you're the presenter and it's your first presentation and you're not experienced and you're not sure what to do with your body, and it's hard enough to focus on the text and the material, and you're all in your head, and you know, it's hard to think about your body. But a confident, good presenter makes big gestures. Similar with the posture. It's very unnatural at the beginning, but the best posture, if you can imagine, is you sitting really upright with shoulders down and back, showing comfort and confidence with your feet shoulder length apart. And your hands comfortably resting close to your body, and eventually, or from time to time, making big gestures to emphasize something, to make a point. Practice posture. It is hard and it can be very uncomfortable in the beginning, but it is really, really, really important. Similarly, just like with posture, big gestures, big energy, big, where to stand and how to move, think about big again, big and close to the audience. Again, if there's a podium, probably you don't want to be hiding behind it all the time. It's a visual fortress, and it tells your audience you're not comfortable with being with them. You're not really engaging in a conversation. You're kind of clustered somewhere away, trying to maybe convey a point, but that's not a conversation. And remember, conferences are about furthering the academic conversation. So feel comfortable, move closer to your audience. Maybe you start your presentation with a question and you move close to them to ask them and invite the audience to answer your question. You also want to move. Again, you don't want to create the perception that you're sitting somewhere embattled and sort of indefensive, not afraid to move. If you can, make a point and move to one corner of the room. Make your next point there, but then to shift and to allow your audience to pause, understand there's a pause and you're moving to the next point, move to a different corner of the room. And here, big, sweeping, confident movements. right? You don't want to be rocking back and forth, side to side. This is a signal. This is a nonverbal signal that you're uncomfortable. And that does not make for a very strong conversation. Finally, again, in terms of bigger is better in terms of body language, more is better in terms of eye contact. If this is a conversation, you want to look at your audience, and you want to look at not just one person, not at the friendly smiling face, which can be comforting to you as a presenter, but try and engage with everyone in the audience. Invite everyone to participate. We as humans, we can't help but respond to eye contact. If someone is looking at you, you tune in and listen. And so use that to your advantage to make sure your audience participates and follows you throughout the presentation. And finally, voice. Voice is very, very important. Voice triggers us and signals things to us in a subconscious level. For women, a high-pitched voice is a sign of trouble, and it can be so very annoying. So to the extent that you can, breathe calmly and use the most melodic voice that you have. For men, it's the opposite, where their voice is low and booming. Again, it signals threat, and it signals aggression rather than assertiveness. So again, experiment, try to breathe no matter how nervous you might be. Try to be excited about the topic so you can have the most melodic, the most inviting, the most soothing and engaging voice that you can. And with the voice too, experiment with pauses. There's nothing like a pause in a presentation to draw the attention of your audience. It signals to them that one thought has ended, another one has started. Or that you're stopping because you're about to make a really important point. Same is true with pace. Just like with body movement, you want steady, confident pace. You don't want to be talking too fast because no one can pay attention and you might have a horrible accent like me, and then your presentation would be a disaster even if it was the most interesting research on the planet, right? You want to pace yourself, but you also don't want to go too slow because then people will zone out. Same with volume. If you speak quietly, the audience doesn't really think that you want them to engage. It's more like you're saying things to yourself. You're not inviting them to a conversation. So have energy, have big, confident, projecting voice. That is a sign of being confident, of being open to conversation. So experiment with those. It can be tricky at the beginning, but over time, it really pays off. And it pays off no matter whether you're delivering a conference presentation or whether you're speaking to your teammates or even having a conversation with your superior. Practicing all that will pay off for you professionally in the long term. Okay, over to Elena to talk about other types of materials for the presentation.
Thank you, Tsveta. These were great points, and there's a lot of information in there. And I know it's hard to kind of really absorb all of it when you have never presented and realize how important each one of those points are. But it comes with practice. So I think practice is really the key here, and we'll keep saying that over and over again. Practice, practice, practice. Another thing that you may have seen sometimes in in-person presentations is that people give handouts, and a good kind of cue to whether a handout is needed or not is when there's, for example, a lot of acronyms or a lot of details that people will need to know and refer to as the presentation goes on. So for example, here's one that's talking about financial instruments, and it reminds you what ABS and CDO and so on are and how they came about. So you can refer to them, but be mindful that, again, you're dividing, when you give handouts, you're dividing the attention of the audience, and you don't really want them to suddenly pull away from you and start reading these handouts. So there shouldn't have a lot of new information in there. They shouldn't have a long text. They should just really be very pointed and a crutch, if you wish, for kind of referring to a reference point for them. for the audience. So think about them carefully. A few other things that sometimes people forget to do when you're in person is that even though you are very much encouraged to walk around the room, don't stand behind the podium the whole time, like Tsveta said. You want to engage and look at people in the eye, but don't forget to talk loudly. And if it's a big room, to talk into the microphone, if there is one. So talk ahead of time to the conference organizers. Make sure you understand what the equipment will be. Where will be the microphone? Is there going to be one that you can put on your lapel, or is it going to be only one at the podium and the room is really big? And in that case, it's going to be hard to move around. So you have to think about alternative ways to project energy and engagement. So you have to be that much more animated and really look into the audience and still try to move a little bit around, but you're kind of anchored by that microphone. So make sure that you understand ahead of time, what is this room setup? Again, bears repeating, it was said, but it will say it again. Look into the faces of your audience. Don't avoid them. Don't think of them as somebody who's there to get you. Think of them as, again, you're telling them a story and you want to draw them in. And drawing them in requires actually talking to them. Again, arrive early, test everything, right? Not only know what's going to be there, but once you get there, test it. Test that microphone. Put your slides on the projector. See if everything works as intended. Get a feel for the room. Walk around, right? Don't kind of make yourself feel that this space is completely unknown to you. Get comfortable with it. At least 5-10 minutes if you can ahead of time. When you practice, ask a friend to tell you if you talk too fast or too slow. Find the right pace. Sometimes people just really don't hear themselves, or maybe they naturally tend to talk very fast. I certainly know people who naturally talk very fast. That's how they communicate. They think fast, they talk fast. But it doesn't work for presentations. So you want to tell them, slow down, articulate more, and they have to practice over and over again to make that comfortable for them and not revert to whatever is their usual pace. Most importantly, be yourself, right? So don't think that because you're presenting, you have to suddenly kind of embody somebody else, that you have to be different than your usual self. Don't do things that don't feel right for you. You may have heard that you need to tell a joke, but if you're not generally a person who tells jokes, don't try to force that, right? It's not going to come off naturally. You may have heard, like you just did, that you need to move around a lot. Again, if it makes you feel highly uncomfortable, try to move as much as you can and you feel comfortable with that, but not to the degree that you start getting distracted and start getting uncomfortable in your skin. And in order to do all of these things right, in order to get comfortable with things that are uncomfortable in the beginning, practice, 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 and practice in front of people who are your friends and who don't hesitate telling you, well, you know, you need to do this or don't do that. So these are important things to know. Now, with the new COVID situation, and it seems to be staying with us regardless of COVID, more and more we'll be doing online presentations, and conferences are still to a large degree online. So there's some specific things for online presentations that you need to know and think about ahead of time. For example, the light, right? So get the lighting right. That's very important. You need balanced lighting, not just from one side. As you see here in the example, one is well lit, the other one is dark. You can't really see the person well because the light is behind them. So think about, where is your source of light? The best situation is if you have a light behind your computer, so your face is lit up. If you can sit in front of a window, that would be great. But if not, put a light behind your computer. Have a light above your head. So in other words, make sure you're well lit. That's number one. Number two is make sure where the camera is. Play to the camera. I've seen very often people have camera up here or down here, as in this example with the photo. And again, it does not feel like you are talking to people. So we have to try and simulate that we are in the same space together as much as possible. So we don't normally look at someone from underneath or from above. So place it at face level. And then look into the camera, right? Look into the camera, because that creates, again, the sensation that you're talking to someone. Sometimes it's very helpful, I have found over the last 2 years, to turn off the speaker view, because people will tend to look at themselves. They really, that's a natural thing. You want to see how you look. But turning off your speaker view takes that temptation away. So you are going to be looking at the camera. And then don't forget, if you're on a panel and you're not the only speaker, and you're not speaking at the moment, make sure you're still paying close attention, right? Make sure you're still looking at that camera. Don't get distracted and start doing other things, because you're still on the panel and still people are looking at you. So that's very important. Another thing is to pick the right background. Think about what works well. It can add or it can distract from your professional image. Too cluttered with patterns distracts. So for that, virtual backgrounds, for that reason, can be tricky, right? You may want to put a photo of a nice beach behind you. Professional image, you could put, for example, something Columbia related in the background. People have also started putting more and more a virtual background of an office. Even though they're not in an office, they'll put one that looks like kind of like they're in an office. So think about that carefully as well. And colors also, you don't want them to be too bright either, because that's distracting as well. Very important is to build in redundancy. Things happen with technology. It's very distracting, again, to start futzing with microphones and cameras and other things. And if you somehow have a unstable connection, so build redundancy. Give your slides to someone else, to, for example, the panel discussant, so they can put them up if you can't for some reason. Make sure your connection is fail-safe. Sit close to the Wi-Fi. Plug into the modem, or kind of do both, right? Have both things. So make sure that your connection is as stable as possible and you have a backup. Test your microphone. If needed, get an external one. Test your camera as well. So build in redundancy. In other words, make sure ahead of time everything is going to be stable and working. And finally, when your presentation is done, there is usually a Q&A session where the audience asks you questions. Think about that part of it as well and get ready also for that. The first thing you can do is anticipate the questions. You're the expert on your research. You have spent a lot of time thinking about it. You have thought about every potential angle. So you should be well prepared about the questions that may come up. So have answers prepared. Very often, you cannot cover everything that you did in your research. That's why we suggested earlier that you use extra slides. Prepare more than you're actually going to present. And if there is a question that you anticipate will be coming up, have a couple of slides ready and say, oh, funny you should ask. I have just information on that, and give them that slide. Give them a little more. That would be very impressive. If you are not clear what the question being asked is, repeat it back to the person asking. Ask for clarification. Don't be afraid to do that. It doesn't mean that you are not understanding something. It just means that you really want to understand what they are asking and answer that particular question. And, there will be criticism. Sometimes people are not afraid to voice their criticisms of what you have done. It varies by discipline, largely how comfortable people are with giving criticisms. But what you want to do with that is not to engage in a debate. It's just to give an answer as best as you can. Don't take it personally. Think of it as just a debate of ideas, and answer as best as you can. And if you don't know, it's okay to say that you don't know. It is actually better to say that you don't know than to come up with something on the fly without sufficient evidence. So just say, I don't know, I can look that up. That will be my next point. That will be my next, how I'll continue my research. So time to shine. The Q&A is not, you're not done yet. Think of this time also as, oh, I can give more. I can show that I have really thought about everything and answer all kinds of questions, and I can be prepared for that. Okay, all of that comes with lots of practice, practice, practice. So I encourage everyone to do that, use their friends and family to practice. So this is it for us. I've stopped the share, and now we have a little bit of time. We started a little